Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of One Vision, the FinTech Fuse. This is Theo, your host for today's episode. Joining us from New York, oh, this is nice. I don't really get to talk to people from the same coast, is Ed Maslaveckas from Bud. Hello, Ed, and welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me, Theo. Happy to be here.
Yes, this is actually this is fun because I have actually followed you guys for quite a while now. And so when your team reached out and say, "Hey, maybe we can put an episode together." This is nice. I
Yeah.
love that. So finally have you and Simon, right? Did a
Yes.
show
Yeah, we did a show.
a
Yeah,
while ago.
a
Yeah,
while
yeah,
ago.
yeah.
Yeah, I need to do more of those. It's been a very distracting beginning of the year, but we're kind of back into business now.
It happens, it happens. That's all right. It's all good. So let's talk about how Bud started, the
Yeah.
founder's journey. Walk us through that.
Wow. I mean, so we're coming up to almost 10 years ago
Has
now.
it been 10?
Yeah, 10 years. 10 long years.
Fun years though, right? I hope.
There was fun. It's been fun. So somebody, I had a friend teasing me the other day because like um, somebody asked me like on an interview, like, "Oh, what are some funny stories
Uh-huh.
about like that you have?" And I'm like, I, I'm, I'm a bit of a silly goose in general in my life, and so, but when it comes to like just being a founder, it's really often not very funny at all. It's the least funny thing about my life, and so I was really like I couldn't think of a single funny thing. A lots of things have happened and changed, and like there's been some good learnings, but yeah, funny things tend to happen outside of running a startup. Maybe things that are funny to outsiders, but to you, it's too personal. It's like your child. So,
Oh, come on. There's always a fun story.
well, yeah, lots of twists and turns. Like, so the original idea for Bud
Hmm.
was 2014. I was working at Salesforce, and we started kind of like it was like when a lot of the like UK fintechs really started to emerge. TransferWise, Monzo, which was Mondo Bank then, Starling was sort of its predecessor to that. You had like a whole bunch of different fintechs, and so like being like at Salesforce, we started to think about a little bit about how do we service this like London emerging market and how are all these people connected. And so just thinking more about the fintech ecosystem and learning about it, I kind of started to realize that, hey, these are like new products which are basically slightly better deals for people, but people don't like in en masse don't really know much about them. And so at Salesforce, we were trying to help, market to their customers and like, get their messaging out and like you can do a lot of personalization, things like that. And so what I thought was like actually it'd be really cool if we could just bring together a bunch of different fintech services because they were like, they had that typical map where you had like the view of like the banking home screen and then all the different logos coming off of it. And I was like, well, what if you just built a bank that was like built a banking experience that was just like culmination of like the best in class fintech services, and that would therefore be like the best product and deal that you could get. And so it's this idea of marketplace banking, and so we built a B2C app which basically did two things. One, it understood your money from your different data feeds, like a mint.com. But then we would recommend different like fintech products, and we also integrated those products so you could use them within the app. Obviously, that it was a little bit cumbersome in terms of like onboarding to different products, using them, like recommending products. We built some like early like Netflix style recommender systems, which was like super early financial AI stuff, which really was the beginning of our AI journey. But by building that, we kind of realized the core challenge that no one had really solved at the time was like building really good models to comprehend the customer data. So like, what is your central customer intelligence? So therefore you can like give really accurate insights and recommendations to customers. And so that was our first 2 years. And so, yeah, so like, I started out calling like my really good friend who's a developer, like how would we build this and what APIs were available. And we came up with like a bit of a game plan. And then I was in Dublin at the time, and I went over to London and basically said, "Oh, like I was staying over at his at his like that week, and I was like, let's go to the pub. I've got a presentation I want to like walk you through. So we went to the pub, and I kind of like pitched in this idea, and he just
Did
thought,
you write it in the napkin too? That would be classic.
yeah, it wasn't quite napkin math. I mean, the maths was, back of the napkin, or you know, cigarette maths, cigarette packet math. We call it something different in the UK. But yeah, and then he was like, "Oh, you're pitching me." I was like, "Yeah, I'm pitching you. Like, you want to come and like do this thing?" And he was like, "Yeah, well, why not? Like, I'm a developer, and this is like a way more like just." He's like, "I'm just like it was a developer and agency," and he's like, "This is like I'm not building products. I'm just building like things." And so yeah, he got excited by the idea, and then we just started, and like it was more like an obsession with an idea. Like I had this idea that it would be a really cool thing to pull off. I still don't think anyone's pulled that off yet. Um, but if we could pull it off, it'd be very cool, it'd be helpful, and be like a fun journey, which we thought it'd be fun. Naive. So yeah, so that was that. And then it was, two of us, and then sort of five of us for the first year, really just building this thing. We got the product to market, a couple of thousand customers. And then we kind of built that. It was cool. There was some challenges at the time, like it was very expensive to get customers into the app. It was very much like we didn't have the sort of content marketing kind of like strategies that you have today. It was kind of expensive to get customers in. And then like the payoff for customers was like very difficult to get them onto a financial product and then start using it and billing for it. So that's just the model was a little bit broken. So it was very difficult to scale that business. But we actually started to get approached by a number of different banks in the UK after about like 2 years. We had the app running, it was working, and they came to us and started saying, "Oh, this is actually quite cool. Like, would you consider licensing some of this technology to us?" And then we kind of like, now we were not, in the pub, we were in an office, and we were like, with a little flip chart, kind of like drawing on a whiteboard or whatever, or like I think it was a flip chart if I remember. Like, okay, well, what if this, the maths of like what the different business models. And we thought, if we want to help people like understand their finances, find relevant products, like it'd be better to do it inside the applications where they already were. And so from 2017 to 2020, that was basically the business. We were building these kind of like intelligent marketplaces for banks. And we were working with like a couple of other banks. We built like prototype versions for. The biggest one was HSBC. We built this app called Arthur, which had a marketplace in the app, and it was like meant to be like basically a digital challenger for HSBC. I still think a great idea, but it like if you could pull it off. But the challenge was like a lot of banks found that like they didn't really want some little pokey fintech running an application for them and deploying at speed. It was like too risky for their brand. That's kind of how they felt about it. And so we realized that wasn't going to work. So that was the second pivot, within 4 years. And then we kind of stumbled on like, well, we started to think, what is the core thing that we can do for everyone that we're like really good at? And that was like this idea of like essential customer intelligence, and that we could just like do that via a set of APIs and then roll that out to banks. And that was a better business model for 2 years. But then, by being just in the UK, we started to find that like there was a little bit of a limitation, right? There's only like, 5 or 6 big banks, maybe only 2 or 3 of them will work at one time. And then there's a lot of smaller fintechs in the UK. It was just a difficult market. So this is like, long story. But, and then in the last 2 years, we launched the US and then really started focusing on like community and regional and kind of like, as we call it, like mid-market banking here. Which is typically anyone from like 2 billion assets up to like 65 billion in assets. They have like a real desire to compete. They have a strong impetus to really help their customers and really understand their customers better, give them actionable insights. And so that's been a real breakthrough for us. And so being in the US is like we developed some new products around personalization and some like intelligent customer like AI widgets. And so the combination of that has like allowed us to move into the US. So it's been a 10-year, you see these graphs like talking about like how long it took this company to get to product market fit. For us, it's like really 9, 10 years, really right on the end of the curve of like how long it takes to get product market fit. So yeah. So
Well,
that's the story.
it's an evolution though, right? I mean, you evolve. I think that the biggest lesson in here is adaptation, being able to adapt and figure out what else you need to do, which, it's a gift.
Never say
Um,
die.
yes.
Uh,
So I was going to ask you, how did you end up in the US? But I guess that answered that.
yes.
Knowing what you went through, right? The first phase of it, the second phase, when you ended up with HSBC, actually, I thought about that reminded me of what Standard Charter is doing in Hong Kong. They stand up a separate one called Mox,
Mhm.
which is their own. And when I look at things like that, I often think about, are they actually cannibalizing their own business? Um, would people actually end up closing their Standard Charter account and starting with Mox because it's easier, simpler, it's less fees, et cetera, except especially when they keep building through it. So I think that whole model of how do you work as a digital bank alongside with the legacy bank, that's still
Yeah.
changing. But knowing what you know now with your 10-year journey coming up, would you have changed anything
Exactly.
differently?
I think, it's always difficult to from hindsight, everything's very clear. At the time, it's hard to say. There's one regret that I have.
Regret?
Yeah, one
Uh-oh.
regret is in 2019, we identified this like mid-market opportunity in the US, and we were like, let's do it. And for lots of different reasons, we ended up not doing it. And we always thought, okay, maybe I was speaking to someone yesterday. It's like 9 out of 10 fintechs from the UK that try and break the US fail,
Mm-hmm.
and they were like, yeah, it's very risky, and so we were like, okay, let's just not do that. So, but every year we would go to 2020 in Vegas just to like see what was going on in the US, and so we were always kind of like up to date with like what was happening in the US market, and yeah, like we just decided, kind of coming out of the back of kind of 2022 that like actually like we should try and start selling some of our services into the US. And yeah, we kind of like had a lot of interest. We had to change some of our products around at the time because like as we launched in the US, there was kind of like the um sort of like I don't know what you would call it, but it's like a bit of like a banking wobble. That would be like it was like a little bit of like the sentiment fell out for like a lot of banks, like there was a lot of questions around like what was happening with Schwab, and then there was the what was led by what was the name the business banking company that went under the bank.
You're talking about SPV?
SPV,
Silicon Valley
yes,
Bank? Yeah.
yes, yeah. So that was a bit of a wobble. So we had to like slightly like change some of our plans, but yeah, and then we just kind of like we kind of grinded it out and got our first customers in the US, and then you get your first reference customers, small fintechs, and then you work your way up to some of the banks and some of the platforms, and that's been the 2 year journey. It's been I spent 180 days in hotels, and last year and the year before, and so this year a little bit more stable in terms of traveling.
Don't track that number, by the way. I stopped tracking it. The miles and hotel nights. No, 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 no. You can't go there because then you start wondering, what am I
What am
doing?
I doing? Well, you
Right.
do have to track it for tax purposes in the US, so that's kind of like the reason why I know exactly how
Oh,
many
right.
days.
Because dual.
Yeah, and
Yeah, yeah, there's that.
but it is depressing for sure.
It is depressing. I remember there was one time I went through a 3-year period where I bought a new condo in DC and I sold it after 3 years. It was almost like it was never lived because I spent most of my time at that time in the UK and had a flat in the UK.
Right.
And every time I just come home, do whatever, meet friends and do paperwork I need to do and just go back. And after 3 years, like, what am I doing? That was not cool. So I
Yeah.
stopped that. Let's go back to earlier, right? When you were starting, you talked a little bit about customer intelligence, you talked about data.
Yeah.
And now if we look at where we are in 2025, we are squarely right in the middle of yet another AI hype cycle, I would say. Thank you, ChatGPT, OpenAI, and all the likes of it. This cycle is wild though, because I remember last time when we went through this quite a few years ago, that was when there were a few apps that came out. People were saying, oh, these are things that will just do everything for your life. It will schedule meetings. It will read your emails. I don't even remember those. And it turned out that a human was behind it. Humans were behind it doing all these things. So that was wild. And now this cycle came, but it's a little different because now you have technology that people can play with, people can see. And now they're actually banking industry that's saying, oh yeah, we're doing stuff, we're doing pilots, we are doing all kinds of things. You're in the middle of data. You're in the middle of trying to get intelligence out from data and helping FIs figure out what to do with it and be smart about it. From your vantage point, from what you've seen, what are some of the common challenges or mistakes? I don't like to use that word, challenges, that you have seen, and can they actually be AI ready? Because that's one of the biggest questions that people have. Everyone say they're using it, but are they actually doing something with it?
Yeah, there's something like 500 pilots at the moment, and probably mostly done by the consultancy firms, and there'll probably be like 489 failed pilots, and
they don't. The press release doesn't talk about failed pilots. Press release always talk about, oh, we've launched these things, and then you don't hear about it.
How much money have you spent building internal projects and standing up teams to build stuff that will never come to the light of day? I mean, that's always the challenge with especially with big banks, and that's people just trying to keep their teams as big as possible, which is kind of the opposite of where I think the opportunity is in AI. Is that like I really think it's really like the biggest focus. Obviously there's the customer outputs, but the biggest focus is just like internal processes. If you think about what a bank is, it's a lot of like human labor sort of data orchestration processes that could be automated in some way. From our side, like where we really focus is there are AI models that you've got your generic, we just sometimes it's called like generic LLMs, or like kind of different types of LLMs that have like general intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And they're not really specified. And so what you find is like a lot of these like things where you can just like use a general intelligence and you can teach it FAQs and do customer service and stuff. That's like super low hanging fruit, and like everyone should get on board with that, and that's going to get better. Where we're really focused is like anything that requires customer context. You need like specific, like verticalized financial services customer context models, and that's the thing that we built. So actually, our core data enrichment tool, or AI, if you will, was actually a LLM. An open source LLM that we began forking and building on ourselves from 2018. And so like we've been in this game a long time, and we like built specialized models to comprehend the financial data. And then what we do is when we work with banks, we either do this for them or we help them do it, is we'll then layer over a generic LLM. So if you ask the LLM a question, whether it's about your business, like find me customers who'd be relevant for a credit card or travel card, or a customer asks like, how should I be budgeting better? What that then does is it understands the human prompt. It generates a query, and then that query goes and asks our financial AI, get me this information, and then the LLM then will like feed that information back in a really like nice comprehensible way. And so what that does for banks is it allows them to actually like use their data in these AI experiences, whether they're for internal use cases or external use cases. But it also means that the bank doesn't have to be sending off their customer data to a third party. And so in that way, like it's very much protected, and you're not sending your customer data to like a open source LLM, or like you're like feeding into another database. And so that's like two things that are helpful. One, we have like very accurate models that are like battle tested and process billions of transactions. But the second thing is that there's the data security piece there, and then the performance as well. So if you are asking an LLM to categorize and understand the financial data, there's like, you're talking about billions of transactions, it would take a long time, first of all, because you have to process like thousands of transactions. There's like a lot of like if you're asking LM to interpret the financial data, it will sometimes just make stuff up. And so like it avoids that problem. And then it's like, you know, the response time of that would be like over 400 milliseconds in terms of like the query, but then actually would take a lot longer. So like our platform is like more performant and just like costs way less. Like if you're asking a generic LM to enrich every transaction, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot of money. It's a lot of compute. It's like putting a a giant diesel engine in a little minivan or something, or a mini car, you know, like a Mini Cooper or something. It's just not fit for purpose, and it's going to be an absolute disaster. And it's just like so that way we use the best of both. We use like verticalized, really like responsive LLMs to do like the core financial insight, and then we use the generic LLMs just to like you do what they're good at, is like communication back and forth, or like quite good at like data analytics. Like providing, if we provide a bunch of like data insight, like here's their income, here's their outgoings, here are the things they like to do, and like things we found in the data set, and then we can provide it. Then we can train LLMs to be very good at like finding like unique information per customer, or like across the entire bank as well.
That's cool. I like what you just described. There was another credit union that I talked to in Central Europe. They were doing something similar, but how they were, one of the biggest area they spent time on is how do you layer the approach so that you can have the technology to understand what people are asking about, but then in turn find ways to safeguard your response so it doesn't end up making stuff up, which we've seen plenty of examples lately.
Yes.
So
Yeah, we've been working on some of that stuff, and you just need to constrain it a lot. And yeah, you just need to put a lot of guardrails in place, and you need to build experiences where the customer, like you can have different constrained models performing different tasks. That's something that we found quite nice. Like we have this thing called transaction search, which you can ask questions about your transactions. And so like the data flow works how I just described, but like we limit these responses to like things that we can find, that things that are applicable to your transaction data. So things like, tell me how much I spent on my car. Then it'll go and like find out, like it'll find like insurance, your car insurance, you know, how much you spent last week on your car insurance, you know, how much you spent on gas, how much you spent on your car repayments, you know, anything adjacent to like that specific cost. So it'll create like a nice little summary there. But what in transaction search, you can't go and say like, set me a budget or something like that. Because like if you start to like give all these types of like, you try to do everything in with one sort of AI experience, you know, it just opens the amount of constraining that you have to do. It gets like you have to go on these little narrow paths and make sure you constrain it for these questions and that questions. But if you do it like in line and constrain it a hell of a lot, then you can get some really cool outcomes from that.
it's a journey, shall we say?
Yeah.
So along with that, I want to ask you, in the last, let's say maybe 5-6 months, this whole chatter about future finances, agentic AI is like exploding. Everywhere I go, people are like, oh, you know, we're going to be deploying all these agents, and now you have the agent to manage the agents. I hear a lot of talk though.
Yes.
It's all talk. They all look really pretty on presentations. They all look pretty on the PDFs that people send out.
Yes.
How do you think this future is going to play? I'm going to ask you for a crystal ball. Because is this yet like another hype? Is there something else we actually should be focusing on that is more real use cases that deliver real value instead of just going off to a la la land?
Okay, so agentic is like really interesting, like something that we spent a bunch of research time and dollars on throughout last year. Something we've like put a bit of a pause on for the time being. Like the way I see it is like the outcome is this. It's like the biggest thing in financial services that's in like that creates issue not for the bank, that creates issue for the individual is inertia, right? Like the idea that like you should probably change your car insurance, you probably should remortgage, you probably maybe your bank is charging you nasty fees, but you just like, oh, whatever. whatever, I can deal with that.
I have a list of that.
Yeah. And so like the promise of agentic is to be able to do all those, like automate all those tasks for you. And I think that's certainly going to be possible at some time. I mean, it can't right now rely, like, again, I'm very optimistic about the future of AI. I don't think I'm a bit, I don't think some concerns about this idea of AGI. I really don't think we've seen anything that gets us there. Like
I think we have other problems we need to deal with first, but
it's good at pattern like these AI models are good at pattern recognition. That's what they do, and then they predict, they create new tokens and like create predictions. They're not anything I've seen yet. It's not like coming up with like entirely new concepts. And even though we call it generative, it's not generative. It's regenerative, I would say. Right. So anyway, there's a bit of divergence there. So like, but for the sake of financial services, it's about performing these tasks for people. And like agentic models can't really that reliably book a flight for us, and that's like or like book a holiday, and like it will come, like it's getting better all the time. Like there's some good use cases that we see, but in financial services, when we thought about this core problem, we were like, what is the model that helps us to create these outcomes? So what we began building was this agentic model, which basically was the sort of the model that we could test over time and we could see the performance versus like the real world, was this idea of interest optimization. So because basically what you're doing is you're asking a model to predict what the customer's balance will be tomorrow, next week, whatever, and based off of upcoming balances and changes, therefore it is able to like recommend actions and then take an action for you. So like actually asking a model to like then, okay, like if you find that I'm going to be short on cash, or I have way too much cash. If I'm short on cash, sorry, I'll finish that thought. If you're short on cash, then move money from a savings account back into it and into your like a current account. But if you're like, you have a bunch of cash and you don't have anything coming up, then like move money to higher yielding interest accounts. And then like when those higher yielding interest accounts get to even more, then move it over to like, maybe like a stocks and shares or some sort of like higher yielding kind of like investment or something like that. And so that was like the model. We built like a pretty a good model on that, but like we got the accuracy pretty high, like in terms of like predicting accurately the next day. And the nice thing is you can model this stuff out and say like, okay, run this model over the course of a year or something like that, and then we can look at the real world data from the last year. Like, okay, you've got the data today, and then like you're just going to run your model for the rest of the year, and then therefore like your new balance, day two, you've got a new balance, set of balances because of what you did, and then like see what those outcomes are. And so we got that pretty accurate, but what we found is that long tail of accuracy, like getting to like 98% with like high degree of certainty, plus like the amount of compute, and like there was just a lot of challenges there to get over the line. So we basically put a pause on it. It just became very expensive, and we thought that this is like a little bit ahead of where the financial services industry feels comfortable right now. So like we can build this tech, but no one's going to buy the tech. Like everyone's going to be like, this is like, I want to put like an agent in. I want to have like some sort of like AI generated UI experiences, which is like what we've been working on instead. So certainly possible. And like that, so the whole point of us building that agentic model was, it was like a provable framework for prediction of what customers should do, and then looking at the outcome of that. And so that then those like, not necessarily that exact model, but the learnings from building a model like that based off of the core data then proliferates into like, your insurance and all your other financial tasks. And so that's kind of, again, giving away maybe some of the secret sauce and some of the stuff, but like, yeah, you need some of these core financial comprehension models. And I think they need to be slightly different. They're slightly different than the LLMs that we see today. They're more like the types of models that we're used to like play games and like win games, like play League of Legends, or like these complex like multi-step questions and tasks. Very similar to like the training that was done for like Minecraft, because it's like an open, like Minecraft's really interesting, like open world. There's not really a set of rules. But by like training on a bunch of YouTube videos, like the models were able to understand like what people did in that world, and therefore they would like repeat the kind of the things that people did in Minecraft and like build big castles and stuff like that. And so in that way, then that's kind of the same in my in our opinion, like that's the kind of the core models that are going to be required to sort of like run people's finances or run parts of the bank. So I think we're probably a year plus away from doing that ourselves or someone else doing it. I don't know.
If that's the case, what do you think people should be focusing on right now with the technology that we have, with the constraints that we have or may not have?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit. I think data
Still
analytics.
low hanging fruit?
Yeah, like the world of data analysis,
Mm-hmm.
like running, like what we do is again on our side for financial services industries, we package up all these like customer insights from our core financial models, and then we train LLMs to like find new insights about customers and like things like that. And I think you're talking about, someone like Capital One that has like 1,000 data analysts. And you're talking about then like, oh, if you were to use like this type of product, everyone at Capital One, I don't know how many employees they have, like 100,000 or something, whatever, something like that, could just have a data analyst. They could just ask questions too about the customers and then create outcomes. And so if you think about that from the mid-market, you're actually going to banks where they don't have any data analysts.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying like, rather than it be like, oh, you've got this optimization, you're actually going, actually, you have a new function, which is just a product that you can just ask questions to. You don't like, you didn't have access to a data analyst before. Now you do. Like that's a really great outcome. So I think that, and the models are very good at that stuff. So I think that's low hanging fruit that is not leveraged so much. And then of course, like generating customer experiences, some of the stuff I can talk about transaction AI, like using AI to find really nice summaries in people's data and like give them little updates is, I think, also pretty low hanging fruit. I think we as a company need to keep working to make sure these things are like really cost effective, because obviously these are more expensive. These tools are more expensive than a pie chart. They have better outcomes, but we gotta keep drilling the prices down, which we're doing. But for every bank in the world to use something like that, I think we got to keep doing the hardcore work of making this really optimized.
So let me ask you this, a follow-up question, right? Because if, and we know that's the case, right? You cited the example of Capital One, same with JPM, BFA, and all of those guys.
Yeah.
To be able to use the technology that we have today effectively, efficiently, find use cases that works for the particular bank that they have, you need people, you need data, you need resources, you need money, you need all of those things. Are we, or will we be in a situation where you see the gap between the mid-market banks and the large banks who can afford to do all these things in-house? Will that gap become larger and larger, or will we be able to see a sort of different model evolving for those who can't afford to have the in-house team to do all these things and to be able to leverage the technology? Because what I feel like a little bit, what we see right now is similar to what we saw in the very beginning of internet banking and digital banking, where you have the smaller community banks, the smaller credit unions and what have you, that don't have the resources to invest in the digital experience that they need or their members need, and they just start bleeding out their customer base.
I'm very bullish on
You're the optimist. I forgot.
smaller organizations. I'm very bullish on smaller organizations. I've worked with big banks for 8 or 9 years, or 7 or 8 years, and it's a little bit like it's the dysfunction of large organization is like incomprehensible. And so what I'm seeing in those large organizations is, like, as you mentioned, yes, they have all the resource to do everything in-house. Therefore, they're going to try and do everything in-house. Therefore, they're never going to get anything done. Like that is like, we look at the digital
That's the mic drop moment, by the way, Ed.
Absolutely. And maybe I shouldn't be like, don't get me wrong, I'll help a big bank and we work with some of them. But what they tend to do is they'll take like, okay, we have this like So it's like some of the systems and like the Drive product I talked about, like that, you can just get that, it's done. You know, enrichment models, you can get that, it's done. It'll be cheaper and easier to do it with someone like us or like a different supplier for different parts of the technology stack. It's always going to be cheaper and easier, but someone in a large organization wants to keep their team and do it themselves. And they go, well, the licensing fee for like using this technology is X. I could probably build it in-house and it will cost the same, and therefore we will own the IP. And what they miss out is two things. One, like how much more expensive their capital, like human capital is in the bank, just because of all their systems in place. And then two, the cost of running that product and maintaining it for the next 5 to 10 years. And so this is why like we end up with like the big banks in the state they are, where they're having to just go off and like, as you mentioned, build an entire new digital bank on the side, because they're stuck with like this core technology that they own and no one can upgrade it, no one can maintain it. So I'm very optimistic about the ability for some of the smaller organizations to be nimble and to work with like best in class suppliers. And I think there's a whole new class of supplier coming through. You have the legacy suppliers that are going to give you legacy technology, and they're going to charge you legacy prices. Whereas like, you know, you should work with, you know, upstarts, and like it's, you know, especially in the US, we see this mid-market that I think the mid-market has been held back by legacy technology suppliers that have lost connection with their customers. And ultimately, like, you go around these showroom, these sort of, you know, these conferences, and you speak to them like, how was your experience with XYZ supplier? I'm not going to name names, publicly traded businesses. And they go, we hate them. We hate them. They're horrible. We ask them to do stuff, they don't do anything. And from their side, they're like, well, why would I do that? It's not gonna make me any more money. It's like, you're on this legacy technology that we have, and that's great, and you're just gonna sit on that for 10 years and you can't afford to get off of it. So I think like the cost of new development has really come down with some of these models like Replit and other things. So like upstarts being able to get to feature parity with some of these like more legacy technology providers, the cost has come way down. And I don't think the legacy technology providers have realized that, because back to my original point, dysfunction of large organization is, you know, this is kind of my like banking doge hat, which is,
and is now your opportunity, right?
Yeah, and I think like that's it. It's just like, if you're sat there in a large team, is in one of these big publicly traded technology financial services businesses, you're gonna go, yeah, like no developer will sit there and say like, by the way, I can do all of the stuff you want me to do in like a day rather than 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And a manager's gonna sit there and go, great, like I've got my 50 people that report into like my piece of the org, and they're not a P&L holder, and they don't like go, well, how much can we do? How can we do more? How can we produce more with less people or at less cost? And that impacts the cost that they pass on to their customer. And so like, I think you're going to see that there's already a widening gap we're seeing happening when we're going in and we're like working with these banks. We can do things for them at, you know, at least half the price that had been delivered to before. And I think that's just going to keep coming down. And I think there's going to be an interesting, there's this innovator's dilemma, as you mentioned before, with banks, but I think actually there's an innovator's dilemma from technology suppliers as well now. And I think that is the opportunity for that mid-market. So I really labored that point, but it's really,
I like that. You believe in it.
Yeah, if there was a personal thing I found about financial services, even when we started selling into some of these banks, we were like, you know, 8-9 years ago, we were like, wow, the state of technology and financial services is terrible. And like, why is that? It's like two reasons. One, technology suppliers kind of like maybe legacy, they don't really care once they get to a certain scale. And the people in the big banks are like, they're like on these legacy systems that develop themselves, and people develop the technology have left, and they've sat with all this tech debt. So I just think it's just a huge opportunity, and it's like, I think, understated and under-realized right now. But we just saw a performance for one of the large publicly traded financial services technology companies yesterday, and it was not good. And I think that's going to
No,
continue.
no, yeah, no. I agree. And now, earlier you talked about the cost of developing new tech is cheaper, being able to develop the code base is easier. And, the next area to tackle is how can we convert the old COBOL um,
Yeah.
to Java and to the newer technology. And that is the next frontier. If you can do that, then I mean, sky's the limit,
Yeah,
right?
it's going to be, that's a great point. And it's like, yeah, now they have the coding models are incredible. Like like me and some of the people at Bud started playing with them like well over a year ago, and we're like, this is kind of cool, like kind of fun. And today,
Uh-huh.
like a year later, like wow, honestly, wow, just like we are able to build features and functions within days, like full products within days. And yeah, and the same goes for Cobalt. Like if you understand the like the AI can go through and you can understand the code and like yeah, you just need to develop, and upgrade that model a couple of times and you're good to go and start converting it over. I've not seen too many models that are very good at changing like code bases entirely yet. Like sometimes when we're like, okay, build this like this now, change it so it's an iOS app, use Swift or whatever. It's not so good, but
Mm-hmm.
some of that comprehension. I mean, like the leaps and bounds. So if something's not good at converting from Cobalt today, it's okay. I bet you in a year it'll be fantastic.
I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Looking back at the last few years, the pace of change and development is astonishing. So I wouldn't be surprised it wouldn't take long. Which makes my final question a little bit odd. I think that was too long because originally I was thinking, well, if we use the old way of thinking and planning and all of that, I just had a recent conversation with someone. He's like, you shouldn't be planning for 3 to 5 years because it's way too long. You need to be planning for shorter term because
Far
things
too long.
change so fast.
Yeah.
The economy is changing, the pace of technology development, deployment is changing. So let me ask you this then. In the next few years, we'll shorten the timeline. What do
Mhm.
you think will be the most transformative thing that will happen in how we think about data and how we interact with the data and how we use the data?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Minority Report moment?
Minority Report, like the amount of like I was just getting demoed like a new piece of tech today that we've been building, which is like just a way for like the challenge is now is just a way for like us as people that are working in the bank to actually know how to ask the right question to the model to get the right output
Mm-hmm.
out. And so like we're doing things like we're doing like flowcharts, like, okay, I want to know this about these types of customers. And so like it's about actually being able to ask the right questions. So like some of these flowcharts maybe help people to ask the right questions in the right way to get the right data back. And so like another way we're playing with it is like we're constructing a set, like if you want to create a new segment as an example, rather than like just type, it's almost like too open. So like to create a new segment now on our platform, you can just ask the platform, like I said before, find me customers that are relevant for a car loan. But sometimes like people using the platform are finding it too open. So we're almost like create a new segment, you can click a button and then it will help you construct a sentence. So we'll help you go like, find me customers with, and then like scroll like, income and then greater or less than, and like put that together and those kind of things, right? And so it's funny, it's like almost like constraining people's question, like people's thoughts down to like specific points so they can get very specific answers. And that's it. So like I think that is kind of the reason I mention it is because it's kind of like we almost can find any insight now within the data. So it's more of a question of like what are you looking for and like what is the right insight to go after. And so I think we're just going to get better at finding those like key data questions. For like the outcome that we're looking for. Is it revenue generation, customer engagement, reducing fraud and risk and all these kind of things? Because all the data is there, we just need to find the right signals. And so it's really just about like, yeah, you're searching for signals, right? So it's like, that's kind of, I kind of think about like searching for aliens, it's like looking for these special signals coming from outer space. Like that's what it feels like from a data perspective. Like there's a signal in there, we just need to find it.
It almost sounds like actually the title for your next album or something, Searching for the Right Signal. Or
I've been doing that my whole life.
it's your side job, right? Apart
Yeah.
from everything else that you're doing. Okay. All right. All right. I can do that. I would love to watch that, by the way. But this is great. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see what's next, actually. The next 5 years, the next 10 years of Bud and the next evolution hockey stick that you guys are gonna have.
Let's take it 1 year at a time.
Oh,
Let's take it 1 year at a time.
okay. All right.
As
That's
well.
fair. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ed, for joining us today. I love the conversation. So let's continue that. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision. I hope you had as much fun as we did in here. There are lots more others that we were talking about outside of the recording that you didn't know. We do share some common interest, but we'll save that for next time.
Absolutely.
Until then, yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you all next week.